Hello, I'm Dr. Angie Randazzo, Director of Patient Engagement and Advocacy for Clinilabs Drug Development Corporation. Today's discussion is brought to you by Clinilabs. We are conducting this discussion so researchers can better understand the patient perspective and perception of clinical research and translate that into the trials we conduct. By doing so, we can hopefully get new therapies to the patients in need sooner. Today, we welcome Claire, who has had Parkinson's disease for about 10 years. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you so much, Dr. Randazzo.
When were you originally diagnosed with Parkinson's, and what stage are you in currently?
Well, I was diagnosed in 2016, so 8 years ago, but I probably had symptoms 2 or 3 years before that. The stage question is a difficult one because there's a YAR 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stage, and there are many other ways to calculate. And my neurologist doesn't seem to rely on those so much. But I asked him, and he said probably somewhere between 2 and 3. 3, you start falling, which I haven't done. So I'm in mid journey, I guess.
How did you first realize that something was wrong?
That's a really interesting question because it took me a while and I kept kind of accumulating different symptoms and seeking help. And it was only after a number of years, maybe 3 or 4 years, that I actually figured out that the constellation of symptoms that I had probably was Parkinson's. So that's how I became aware slowly over time.
And Claire, can you tell us what has been your biggest challenge to date?
Well, for me, and I think the biggest challenge for many people who are diagnosed with Parkinson's is first accepting that it's real, that it's not curable right now, and that it's progressive. Because just as you adjust to one stage, you then get another stage and it can take over your psyche. That was hard for me also because one of the symptoms I had was anxiety, which is a symptom, not necessarily the result of Parkinson's. So that was hard to sort of put it in its place and realize I could keep trying to do my best with the Parkinson's while leading a full life beside that. Once I was able to realize I could still have fun and still have friends, things became much easier, but it's definitely not a cakewalk.
You've participated in a variety of studies, but none of them drug studies. Is that correct?
Yes, if clinical means medication, I did go to a clinic for one of my research activities where my responses were measured, but nothing with any special equipment. I have participated in studies, I would say.
What motivated you to participate in the studies you have participated in?
I'm kind of curious. What motivated me was that I am curious about a lot of things and I like to know the details. So when I was diagnosed, I immediately started reading up on Parkinson's and joining Parkinson's groups and, looking around. And at the time also, I felt very isolated when I was first diagnosed, and reaching out to people who were actually working on Parkinson's gave me a sense of community. I was also motivated because when I read the descriptions of the trials, they were personal. They had a personal application to me. One that I did involved looking at the relationship between off times in medication and anxiety. Did it follow the same pattern? And since I had been feeling a lot of anxiety, I was curious about that too. And I noticed when my meds wore off, I felt more anxious. So, that was like speaking to me in a way. I think also I wanted to give back. I've been so amazed at the number of people in the Parkinson's community who don't have Parkinson's, who are working day and night to try to make our lives easier. And I appreciate that. And I wanted to do something too. And I know it's really hard to find people for studies sometimes.
What was the benefit of participating in the studies you participated in?
The benefit to me was in a funny way, taking my mind off myself and thinking of a larger worldwide global community of people who are suffering from the same thing. It kind of helped me put things in perspective. Another benefit was just meeting some of the researchers who have been, who are so kind and funny and smart. I like meeting people. And again, feeling that I could be an active person and didn't just have to kind of degenerate into, a passive observer of life. I haven't seen any of the results of the studies that I've been a part of. I hope I get to see them.
Were there any drawbacks for you?
One reason I did the studies I did is that they were nearby. Transportation is a difficult thing. And one that I was considering doing, I would have had to travel and stay in a place that was about 4 or 5 hours away for 6 weeks. And I just couldn't do that. But for me, I don't think the ones that I have done have been disruptive or unpleasant. There was nothing that was difficult, really.
Right.
But I know for some of my friends, I'm curious about why they don't participate maybe in trials, because I keep seeing all these ads and not ads, but descriptions, we need help. And I think, one, it's really important to establish a routine with our medications, with our exercise, with our sleep. And the idea of entering a clinical trial that would require us possibly to change our medication just when we've been struggling so hard to keep it working is an obstacle. I think distance is another obstacle for sure. Maybe there are people who could easily pick up and go, but travel is quite onerous when you're slow and when you freeze and when you have luggage. Everything becomes logistically difficult. I think some people are afraid. One guy I know did a study that involved 2 spinal taps, and he went ahead with it, and we all were cheering his courage. But, facing that voluntarily is definitely not for everybody. I think another issue that makes volunteering to be in a trial difficult for some Parkinson's patients that I know, and maybe myself, is that you don't always see the result. You feel that you're joining a big group of, like-minded, friendly people, and that's true. But then once your part is finished, off you go, and you may never hear again whatever happened to those results. And so that's not so much a damper on volunteering as just a drawback later, perhaps, if there's some way of keeping people involved, or at least send them emails right now and then. So anyway.
What would motivate you to consider participating in a medication trial for Parkinson's?
Well, for me, one aspect that would be very important in a trial would be that it is based on sort of reputable protocols, so that it's, double blind, it moves smoothly and ethically through the 3 stages of human testing, but that it is definitely human tested, and that it's not necessarily immediately applicable to a drug, because some of us feel that things are rolled out very quickly without enough consideration of potential side effects later.
What aspects of a study or trial are most important to you?
I think what would be important in a trial for me would be to trust that it was well designed, consistent, had a framework that was predictable, so that I could work my schedule around the trial without disrupting my schedule. For me, and I don't know if this is true for other people, it can't be that far away. Transportation is an issue, as I said. And it would be really helpful if it was, it would be very inspiring to me if it was around some issue that was, happening to me, because not to be self-centered, but every person has a different constellation of symptoms. So, another thing is it would be thrilling to see some research and I would be very highly motivated to join, that was actually able to halt or reverse, I know it's a dream, Parkinson's. A lot of the studies that I've seen lately are fantastic. Their earlier diagnosis, genetic connections, um, you know, intervening before medication, or and all those are kind of accepting the status quo in a funny way. But I know you can't come up with a cure. One can't come up with a cure instantly. But anyway, that would be exciting. I'm not really expecting that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Another one would be if people they trusted, for example, their neurologist or a friend in the study group or the support group, recommended it. I understand that neurologists can't be the representative necessarily of a clinical trials company, and there'd be a conflict of interest. But if I love my neurologist, and if he said, Claire, there's a study going on that you might be interested in joining, that would be a real go-ahead flag for me.
So you mentioned that if your physician suggested the trial, that would be helpful. It sounds like physician endorsement would be appealing to you. And that makes sense because the physician is actually giving his little seal of approval on it.
Yeah, or just a trusted figures, people at some of the foundations or in the local organizations. We happen to have a very good local organization here, but I know they don't make recommendations, and I understand why. They have to think about liability. But I think that would be helpful, because if you're all alone, looking at a website with possible trials that you could do, it's just hard to figure out by yourself. Yeah, I mean, better publicity in a way. I think that there are a lot of people out there who would, for example, I'd be happy to do a drug test trial if I didn't feel that it might threaten, my current, not progress, but stasis. So I think there are a lot of people that if people just said this is a really good thing to do and they heard more about it, they would do it.
It's understandable that once you get that perfect balance of a medication regimen, that you would be apprehensive about changing that. And so participating in a trial that includes placebo, at least, placebo controlled, or a part of the study that involves placebo, that a person might be apprehensive about participating because you don't want to disrupt that routine, that balance that you've achieved.
Also, I think, Parkinson's is a disease of older people. It tends to be, though obviously there is early onset and even child progression of Parkinson's. But it's easy because we become slow, our voices slow down and become gravelly. We almost can look older than we are. I think that, sometimes the public perception of people with Parkinson's, and not just the public, but our own family and friends, can treat us as if we're kind of superannuated. And so participating in trials is really a way to feel, human and alive and not over the hill, if that isn't too much of a cliche. I think sometimes we can read Parkinson's apathy as, somehow personality-driven apathy, a characteristic of that person, when really, I can't blame anybody for not wanting to do more.
What would you tell researchers to make trials more welcoming for you?
I think trials could be more welcoming to patients if the venue by which people found out about the trials was a welcoming and friendly venue, instead of having people just say, go do a trial, here's a bunch of them. If there was some sort of way of, I really think PR around recognizing the value of Parkinson's patients' input, recognizing the absolute need to do 3 trials of human subjects, publicizing how difficult it is. I think if you could rouse people's interest in their own ability to make a contribution, at the same time alert them to the fact that there are all these possible progresses that are being held up by lack of subjects, I think that would go a long way.
What incentives would motivate you to participate in a medication trial in the future?
Yes, money didn't occur to me, but I think that's true, that money could be a good incentive. The dignity, recognizing and showing recognition of the value and dignity of the Parkinson's patients individually, I think would be helpful. It's not necessarily that that's not happening already, but I think those are good ways. I think also that just having more local ones, or I believe there are trials going on at several universities around here, but if you don't go looking for that information,
Right.
You wouldn't know that necessarily.
Sure.
I know there's a trial finder at the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and that's the main one I know. So perhaps that could be more, how could that be publicized more? That's another place where physicians might come in handy, or their assistants, or people in the local organizations, just say, or if they could interview people that have been in more trials, which you're doing. I think that's really a great way to draw attention to the need, and also the ease, and also the fact that your peers have done it means you could do it.
If you could design a study, what would you want to be the focus? For example, symptoms such as tremors or rigidity, walking.
Well, I feel that there are, everything is what could the studies focus on is such a huge question, because the disease is so complicated. So I personally would love more study of non-motor symptoms. There's something like 30 non-motor symptoms that Parkinson's people can have, whereas some of the evaluation of stages are just about motion. But I know I don't want to speak from ignorance, because I know that there are a lot of trials going on that may have to do with symptoms. I think just we're all mystified about the origins. And I think there's a lot of, it could be from Agent Orange, Parquat, groundwater, pesticides, genetics, who knows? And it would be really, if they can't find a cure, just knowing why us, because something like over 70% of Parkinson's is at the moment idiopathic, which for people who aren't doctors means they don't know the origin. And
Sure.
And I know that there are a lot of diseases now caused by environmental factors, and it's too hard to pinpoint one. It's almost like the interaction. But for me, that would be very meaningful. And of course, I hope in the future, I know the Michael J. Fox is familiar to everybody, and he is trying to find a cure, and he's getting a little discouraged. But so I'm not expecting that necessarily, but in my lifetime, but it would be cool.
Is there anything you would like to share with the Parkinson's research community?
One thing I'd like to share with the professional community around Parkinson's is that one reason I volunteered to do this, have a conversation with you, is just because I'm so delighted that there's so much interest in Parkinson's right now. And, it's just to extend my appreciation for all the people who are trying to do something about it. And also it's interesting, even though I'm, suffer some days, I'm also like, wow, the brain is really doing some weird things. So I just want you to know that we're interested, we care, obviously, and we really are cheering you on. And I hope that we can help. I speak for myself. I hope that I can help in some way.
Well, I want to extend heartfelt thank you to you, Claire, for the efforts you made to be here with us today and your time. Clinilabs greatly appreciates your input, and we wish you the very best in your treatment journey.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.